And good evening. It's June 18th, 2024, and we're in our next collection of discussions in our Outside the Class series. It's a series from the Bible Project. It's about the entire TaNaK, or the Old Testament. On TheDustyFeet.com, in the Outside the Class section, we have the TaNaK, or the Old Testament source videos section, set up for your review. Because the intent of Outside the Class is for you to get a chance to listen to the in-class lecture first, and they would all be found in that source video playlist. We're going to try to keep these to about 15 minutes, right? Where we make them easy to catch, make them easier to catch up on. So we're on a quest, scroll by scroll, book by book, a journey through this collection, but with a fun and different twist on Outside the Class, on the Dusty Feet. And of course, before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, it's when you click that subscribe button, please. The reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, it's when you click that like button, because that is the way that YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. So in this series, we're going to be covering the entire TaNaK, right? The entire Old Testament. Yet, we're going to be doing it in the order of the original collection, right? The Hebrew Scriptures order. So, could be interesting after we get past the first 5. But for now, the TaNaK, Old Testament, Genesis, Bereshit, right? Chapters 1 through 11, and this is our part 3. So the events in the garden broke a lot of things. Spiral went very wide indeed. Naked? That's just the beginning. But it's right after this that God goes into his 3-part piece on what are the consequences. What will be the consequence for these choices, this picking the fruit and eating it. There's both short-term consequences and long-term. God will address it in the order of the rebellion, which I liked. So he addresses the serpent first. He really was the first of all to choose to counter God's intent, because then he just compelled others to do the exact same thing he did. Probably wish I could leave a hyperlink right here, and if you could do it and watch and click to right here, because this thought actually lies in the Sermon on the Mount as well, because Jesus reminds him of this exact same thing. Did God really say that? And if he did, Jesus is saying, what do I do now? But there's an interesting perspective to ponder here. Because yes, you're going to be removed from the garden, Adam and Eve, right? The sacred space, right? Life, it's going to be harder to live. But I think the real damage, it's not working harder, it's not having kids, it's the relationships that have been shattered. And they will need to be restored. Because it seems, when you think about it, a lot of Scripture spends a lot of time pointing out, describing, addressing, correcting various broken relationships. All of it stems from choosing this fruit, and it's spiraling out of control. The shattered relationships we have with Adam, Chava, Abel, Cain. That list just continues. I think that is the heartache that God feels most, not being close to us. And then us, in turn, our heartache can be not being close to others. Tim brings it up that the life you now will live is going to be fraught with challenges. It's going to be harder. I think it's going to be a lot of that. Because I think at times we forget that we were already supposed to work, right? We were already supposed to do things. But now, outside the garden, it's going to be tougher. The ground, well, it's now going to resist you. Take more work, right? My own yard attests to this. And yet, as I'm growing to view this differently, and that's indeed a challenge, but the real damage I've seen is really in the shattered relationships. Hard work makes you tired, achy, sore, but the tension in a broken relationship, that's heart-wrenching. At times, it's crippling. One might use the term maybe faith-shattering. But I like where Tim goes with this, and he bounced this around, that things continued to spiral out of control, right? We're looking at this story, and of course, we're looking back. Just like the children of Israel are looking back. Both of us, miserable, looking back. You know, we're looking even further back as we're actually reading this. It's interesting because we can really get a picture of how far rebellion and that decision, how far it can take us. Because I think we fool ourselves all the time. It's only one little decision. Hey, you only ate some fruit. Should that really matter? I mean, it's only one event, one thing that happened. It was only a single choice. And then just one event in our lives. Any single event, one choice. And well, I think we all know how far that can spiral out of control. And yet, when we read this, we realize it becomes more than just one event, right? It really is more than just a single choice. Yeah, it's one discussion they have. And that alone, this ripple effect, as it spirals us down, Cain and Abel, these children, they drive us further down the spiral. It's really worth a read. You really might want to go back and read the challenges between Cain and Abel. Because you find out it's not really about the sacrifice, is it? It's those hearts on display. They're all over the place. Brokenness, corrupted relationships, right? Am I my brother's keeper? You know, it's not about the sacrifice. It was about what each sacrifice represented. Was it the best? Or was it just what I want to bring? You know, Cain, he can even go back, rethink, approach God again. He just chooses differently. Because what they and us are bringing is actually, it's reflecting our own hearts. They reflected their hearts. Do you bring God the best of his blessing to you? Or just what works out? Abel chose one, Cain the other. He went offered the chance to try again. But he had so much resentment, right? And I think that's a big element of broken relationships. Resentment. Then we get this big shift in the story. And most of the time, in my experience, every time we got to this section of scripture, the soft-toed dancing shoes came out, right? They're not sure how they're going to walk around this one. Cain, he's cursed from God, and yet also protected by God. And he heads out east, out of the land of Eden, towards the land of Nod. You know, it almost has a fairy tale sound to it, right? And Cain has a wife. He has a child. It's a son, right? Enoch. Cain he's part of building a city. Matter of fact, he names the city after his son. You know, nothing like being part of a city structure. And all those people in that city. Then it's then that we realize, we reached a few interesting and unanswerable questions. Because there they are. Where did Cain's wife come from? And where would a city, a land of people, come from? Because we know when Cain gets sent out, he is fearful of who would kill him if he left the land of Eden. So, there were already folks out there to be afraid of. You know, we talk around, or probably most often we just ignore. And I think it's just because we don't have an answer. So maybe we need to decide very early in this collection of scrolls that there's going to be things that are unanswerable, challenging, confusing, because we don't understand. The story doesn't tell us. It's left us gaps. And that's good because I think it's good because in a few more chapters, we're going to get to more things that we really don't understand. And yet, we still like to fill in the gaps because it's our penchant. So maybe we should also be fair. It's not unexpected because after all of this happened before the flood. There's a lot that we don't know. I mean, Cain leaves, people all around, cities, men of renown. You know, that topic alone, that divides rooms. Then we get to Lamech, our next big character after Cain. And let's just admit, that boy's a hot mess, right? His hubris is so large that he also becomes the first in Scripture. You know, as we've been noticing, a lot of firsts in this scroll, that Lamech tries to steal a promise. He tries to appropriate, to associate himself with a promise from God for another. And he's going to make it his. Because the vengeance of God would fall on the person sevenfold if they killed Cain. I'm not sure how that plays out. What's sevenfold on somebody? I'm not really sure. But then Lamech, he declares that if anyone would kill him, the vengeance of God would fall on that person 10 times more, right? 77-fold. Because Lamech, he boasts of his feats, right? These bragging about death at his hand. You know, he's saying, he's going, listen, wives, I've killed twice before. I wonder if this scared them or not. I'm not sure. But we know it's bold. We know it's brash. And then he tries to take the promise. I'm not sure it worked. But then to add to the confusing and yet intriguing category, there's a lot of sevens that surround the name Lamech, right? One of them lived 777 years, and from him comes Noah, right? A lot of twists to God's tales. And then we get to another almost record-screeching shift, because right after Lamech, that story ends abruptly, and Adam and Hava have their third son. Intro to Seth. You know, there is so much into the declarations from Hava about her three sons, right? That alone is a very interesting story, and I suggest if you want to dig into it. I think you'll enjoy. But then we get to that next part where, okay, here we go. Now we're at the sons of God, those men of renown, those Nephilim. Okay, in my prior churchianity experience, we never had a flannel graph story of this part of Genesis. Unlike the flood story, right? The ark and those 2x2 animals. But this story, it's very different. So much has been bantered about these sons of God and the ensuing behavior. And all of that is literally just in 4 verses. And all of that happened pre-flood. So, suffice to say, we're not going to get into it here. But if you are interested, there's a link in the description below to Anchor to Truth. They enjoy discussing this topic, and you might find some useful thoughts to ponder. Suffice to say, in verses 1 through 7 of chapter 6, it condenses the reasons for the decision to flood. The earth is going to get a reset, right? A new topography. You know, it's a heart-wrenching declaration, really. God, at this lowest moment, up to that time in human history, he regrets even making us, and the choice to wipe the slate clean. But God, he chooses not to fully eradicate man, right? He picks one man. And then, by extension, it's his whole family. And with that, he's going to start the story again. So next week, we're going to jump into more of the Noah story, the complexities that are parts of it, and maybe we're going to ask a few questions that probably are going to go unanswered. But at least we thought about them. So, thanks for with us tonight on another episode of Outside the Class, the TaNaK, the Old Testament, Genesis, chapters 1 through 11. This was just part 3 on the Dusty Feet.